Welcome to the Foundations of Learning podcast. I hope to inspire you to actively participate in your child's learning journey, fostering a love for knowledge and nurturing the skills necessary for success in a rapidly changing world.
Welcome back to the Foundations of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Shaylee Flint. Today, we are going to talk about creativity. I'm going to discuss a study done by NASA, actually back in 1994. Even though it's an old study, it is something that I think it's important to talk about. We as a society need creativity to innovate, and that was really the reason that NASA did this study, is they wanted to figure out, first of all, what makes somebody creative and imaginative, and is creativity a path to genius? Because when we are thinking about people that are creative, they are more willing to think outside of the box when they are solving a problem. And that is what innovation is, right? Somebody came up with a new idea that nobody else had ever thought of. And back when they did this study, this is when the internet was blowing up, right? So we didn't really know what the internet was. Well, some people didn't know what the internet was. And NASA knew that the internet, or our technological advances that we were making, were going to have a drastic impact on our society and the way that we lived our lives. And so they were trying to find the most creative people so that we could continue the innovations and make sure that it supported mankind as a whole, right? So this is why they had asked George Land to conduct this study about what makes a person creative and how can we find these creative people so that we can hire them on. What is creativity defined as? Creativity is defined as the use of the imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of an artistic work. Now, this doesn't have to always be an artistic work, right? Creativity can happen in so many different aspects that it doesn't just have to do with art. However, that is how they define it. Let's think about what is the root of this word, right? So we have creativity, we have creation, we have create, we have creates. All of those words are rooted in the Latin word creates. And when we are looking at the root of the word, it actually means to bring into being. So again, when you are creative, you literally can birth new ideas out into the world that nobody else has ever thought of, right? So like I said, it doesn't have to just do with art. So George Land was put in charge of creating a test that we could judge the ability of creativity and imagination in people. He started to think like, okay, how could I create this test, and like, where do I even begin? What is creativity? How will I know if somebody's creative? And he decided, you know what, let's look at young children, because young children are super imaginative and generally very creative, right? You think about these young children that are very good at pretend play. They can come up with silly stories. They even might have imaginary friends, right? Like, they are very imaginative and creative, which makes sense because in the development of children, that is where they're at in that developmental stage, right? They aren't really into the logical thinking yet. They are still in that imaginative and creative state of mind. So what he decided to do is he was going to start with ages 4 and 5. And so he had created this like test that he was going to do to kind of mark the boxes of like what is creativity and how he can look at this. So he started looking at 4 to 5-year-olds. And what he found was that with the things that he identified as creativity or imagination, they were scoring 98% on this creativity test, right? So 98% of them were imaginative or creative. So he found that very interesting, but he wanted to see, like, do they continue to stay creative? So what he decided is he went back to those same children when they were 10 years of age to see if they had stayed creative and imaginative, if they lost creativity. And what he found was that by the age of 10, it had dropped to 30%. So from 4 to 5, 98% of them were creative. Now only 30% of them were creative. This started to get them to kind of scratch their heads, and they were like, okay, how come we lost all of this creativity? Is it just something that happens as we grow older? So they decided to make it an even bigger study. They made it a longitudinal study. And they came back again when these same kids were 15 years of age. And what they found is that the creativity, or the amount of kids that were deemed as creative or imaginative, was only at 12%. So then they decided, all right, we're going to take this even further. We're going to test the masses. So they decided to look over 1 million adults at an average age of 31 years. And what they found is only 2% of those people would have been considered creative. They had to decide, like, why do we think that this is happening? Why is it just because we become more logical? Can we all just be creative? Is it something that just some people have and some people don't? But if that's the case, then why are these young children creative? And as we age, we are no longer as creative. They were trying to hypothesize like why this was, and what they came to was schooling. So before I dive into, is the schooling killing creativity? Let's talk about the types of thinking, because this is an important piece when you're looking at or thinking about creativity, which is what they talk about in this study from NASA, is these two types of thinking, and whether or not we are even using both types of thinking, if children are using both types of thinking. So let's get into that. What are the two types of thinking? So the very first type of thinking that you have is the divergent or inductive type of thinking. This is going to be the right side of the brain. So this is where our imagination, our generating of ideas, new possibilities, things like that, that's where this is going to take place. Then you have the convergent or deductive type of thinking, which is going to be the left side of the brain. This is going to be where the judgment, the criticism, the evaluation, the analyzing all come into play. Now, each type of thinking has its place, and we do need to be able to do both. And I would even argue that we still will do both. However, I don't know if it's encouraged in school. We're going to come back to divergent thinking. When we are in a divergent thinking, we have to stop criticizing ourselves and being so worried about failure and or the criticism that we might get from others. We have to understand our ego and let go of that criticism or that fear of perfection or failure. We need to gain self-confidence so that we can let go of conformity, right? So when we are in that creative thinking or divergent thinking, we have to let go of all of that, or we're not going to allow ourselves to think out loud or to throw out a solution that's maybe a ballpark solution, but it's a new idea and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But we get so afraid of that failure, or we get so afraid that we're not going to be perfect, that we sometimes don't allow ourselves to go into that type of thinking. And so I want you to think, just while I'm talking about the other types of thinking, like, why do you think that is? Like, as adults, do we just get into that mindset of being afraid of perfection, or not afraid of perfection, but afraid of not being perfect, or afraid of being judged or criticized? Like, is that just something that we inherently, as we get older, are more scared of? Which, like I said, I just want you to kind of think of that. Like, why would that be? What do you think? Let's think about scientists and what they're doing when they're experimenting. So scientists are going to be really good inductive and deductive thinkers. They're going to use both sides of the brain, and here is why. They have a problem. They come up with a hypothesis and they come up with a plan to solve this problem. Now, more than likely, your plan is going to fail, and you're going to have to come up with another out-of-the-box solution to try to solve that problem. So over and over again, you are being imaginative and creative, but you're also analytic, and you're also criticizing and not afraid of failure, right? So you're doing both of those aspects, and that's what's going to make not only a good scientist, but just a good thinker. Let's talk about inductive and deductive thinkers. So the left side of the brain, as I had said, is more of the verbal, the analytic, the linear. This is where you are really analyzing things, right? Then you have the right side of the brain, which is going to be more of the visual, the constructive tasks, and the creativity. When you are looking at both of them, they are both important, right? So on the left side, we have the verbal, analytic, and linear. So this is where the deductive thought comes in. You will find speech, singular aim, logical thinking, convergent thinking, the main language system, and deductive mathematical analysis. Whereas the right side of the brain, when we're talking about creativity, this is where inductive thought comes in. So this is going to be like matching patterns, synthesizing, fluency of ideas, divergent logical thinking, holistic and global, relationship between the part and the whole, and creativity. But like I had said, you do need to use both sides if we want to effectively solve a problem or even effectively think about a topic. What they had found is that in school, we are mostly using the left side of our brain. So in general, the teacher is telling you what to think, how to think, and what to think about. Within the research, they did note that invention is generally perceived to be something left to chance or happenstance, but this is not so. I intend to show that there is a structured, methodical approach to invention which is based on the natural process of thinking. In other words, anyone can do it if they can think and understand how they think. That's a tremendous concept. The same applies to research. It is creativity that has been lacking in the training of engineers, doctors, business majors, etc. So as the study continues, they start to talk about more about the deductive thinking and the inductive thinking. So they note that deductive thinking is the logical step-by-step process that moves the thinking in an orderly fashion toward a single point, whereas the inductive thinking is more complex. We are now moving from a logical way of thinking to an abundance of ideas that sometimes have different answers. It isn't something that's going to be black and white. So deductive thinking is definitely more black and white, and inductive thinking is not. So deductive, black and white, inductive, colorful, right? You have all realms of possibilities here. When they're looking at education, they definitely believed that we have to allow the students to engage in both types of thinking. Now, to do this, they were saying that what needs to happen is that we first need to teach the material by executing the process and then learning other processes. And this will give them a higher degree of understanding or meaning. So, for an example, if I was to teach a student how to solve a math problem, I could tell them, here is how you solve the math problem. This is the only way you solve the math problem. Now, I want you to think about your school experience, because in my school experience, it was exactly that. I was told, here is the problem, here is the algorithm, here is how you solve it. And so I would try to remember all of the steps for this algorithm, and believe me, I sucked at it. I was not very good at remembering these algorithms, but I was a person that did not want to go outside of the box and try to solve it in a different way. I was too afraid of failure, even though what I was doing was causing failure. I was trying to use the algorithm for getting steps and then getting a problem wrong or whatever. And I might have been better off to understand, like, all right, well, could I solve this a different way? Could I do this way and maybe be better off, right? Like, I never thought those things. And there are people that think that way. Like, I remember, as a child doing homework with my dad, and my dad is more of an inductive thinker in that way. Like, I would be so obsessed over this algorithm that I had to follow because that is the way that the teacher had taught me to do it. And my dad would say, you don't have to do it that way though. Like, we could solve it this way. We could solve it this way. We could solve it this way. And I was so adamant that, like, no, my teacher said. And I think that is a harmful way to think about things. And I encouraged my students as a teacher to think outside of the box, right? I might show them, like, hey, this is how we solve a problem, but can you think of another way that we could solve this problem? And believe me, the kids had so many different ways that they could solve that problem. And if it worked for them and they were getting the correct answers, I didn't care how they solved it, as long as they were getting to the right answer and they understood the concept, right? So that is allowing for inductive and deductive thinking. You are allowing them that leeway of possibilities, but also getting them to understand the logical step-by-step process as well. However, they can come to that process or that answer in whatever way it is, right, that makes sense to them. And so I think it's important to also understand children are great inductive and deductive thinkers. Like, I would have students come up with ways that they were solving problems that I was like, holy cow, I would never have thought to get to the answer in that way, but you got to the answer, and way to go. Like, you understand the concept. And if that's how you want to solve these problems and that's what makes sense to you, go for it, right? And they are great at doing that without us even having to teach them how to do it. They can do that. They're not really scared of failure when they're really young. Now, some kids are a little bit more scared of failure. They're a little bit more worried about like getting in trouble or whatever. But I think that is like the mood that you put on learning is, if your child is scared to fail and they're very young and they like are so afraid to not be perfect, I want you to kind of think about the mood that you put around learning. So I think we have to kind of think about that as well when we are trying to encourage inductive and deductive thinking, is we have to allow for them to fail and then come up with a new idea and so on, and not be so afraid of being imperfect. Let's look at, does our schooling or our school system promote creativity? Now, this is my own opinion on this as an educator, seeing varying environments in which learning takes place. I've seen the schools that they have at the colleges. I've seen multiple districts and the ways that they, implement different learning styles. Like I've seen kind of a realm of different ones. I've taught in a toddler classroom. I've taught in a preschool classroom, first grade classroom, a kindergarten classroom. I've also seen second, third, fourth, fifth. I've seen all of these other grades. So this is just kind of my opinion on it, but I would love to hear what you think. Does our school system promote creativity, and why? Like, what are your reasonings for it? Or maybe it doesn't. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear them. When I'm looking at pre-K, so I'm looking at like maybe even toddler classrooms or preschool classrooms, I would say that they definitely allow for more inductive and deductive thinking because they allow for more exploration and play. Children of a young age should be playing all of the time. Playing is a time where they don't have to, they're the ones that are in control at that point. When they are playing, they are in control of the situation. They're in control of what's happening. They're, some kids are really super bossy when you're playing with them and they're like, no, I will be this and you will be this. And this is how we're going to play. Like they like to have that control. And that is when they can have control in their life, is during playtime. Now you can also, allow for control in other aspects of their life and things like that. But generally speaking, play is where that happens. And when children are allowed to play and explore, this is when they're going to gain an understanding of the world. This is when they're going to practice self-regulation and emotional regulation. This is when they're going to experience more problem solving, because most of the time, like if they're playing with other kids, right, they will have more time to try to solve a problem without a parent jumping in. And so they get that experience of problem solving without a parent being, jumping in and trying to solve that problem for them. They also get to gain a vocabulary, and they can use their imagination, and they can kind of explore interests as well, right? That they find interesting. So like if a child really likes dinosaurs, they'll usually gravitate towards playing dinosaurs, right? Or whatever it is. So it just allows them to really explore in their own thoughts and the world around them. Now, the sad reality is that once you get out of, the toddler classes or the preschool classes and you get to kindergarten classes, which I remember as a child, the good old days of kindergarten, and we got a lot of playtime. Like I actually remember in my kindergarten classroom, we had like these split rooms. So you had like a kindergarten classroom, this like little like dramatic play area room, and then the other kindergarten classroom. And I specifically remember, one, that my kindergarten teacher played the piano all the time, and two, the dramatic play area. Like those were the two main things I remember in kindergarten. I don't remember anything else. Like no clue what the heck I learned in kindergarten. However, I do remember those experiences. So if you even think about that, like the most, impactful piece for me when I'm thinking back as a child was the play piece, was the music, the movement, right? That was impactful for me. And so when we're thinking about like, okay, now you hit kindergarten and the real learning begins, is the real learning really beginning, or are we really stopping the real learning? I don't know, just something to kind of think about. When we start kindergarten, this is when we're really not allowing for that inductive and deductive thinking. We are now like full on deductive thinking, right? We tell the kids that they have to sit down, they have to learn for 8 hours. This is what you're going to learn. This is how you're going to show me what you know. And you get, you're going to be there for 7 hours, and you maybe get 2 recesses that are maybe 15 to 30 minutes. There's not a whole bunch of playing that's happening. They have so many rules they have to follow. They have so many expectations that they have to live up to, and very little time where they actually get to take risks without there being a problem for taking that risk, right? Maybe if I take a risk on solving this math problem, I won't do well on my math test. Or maybe if I, take this risk or creative here, maybe I'm going to get in trouble for doing that, right? And so it's almost like we kind of crush that inductive thinking as soon as they hit kindergarten, which I think is so sad in my opinion. I wish we could do better. By the way, I did sub for a kindergarten class the other day, and they had in their sub plans that kids just get to play, like dramatic play for 30 minutes. There are teachers out there that are still trying to keep imagination and play and creativity and risk taking and building in their classrooms. Like they are trying. However, for the most part, when you work for a district, you are told stick to the curriculum. We don't have time for any of this other nonsense. To them, it's nonsense. And we have these expectations. This is how much time you need to spend in reading. This is how much time you need to spend in math. And we just don't have time for the play. In their defense, we are not doing great when we look at math scores and when we look at reading scores. However, I think that there are a lot of other problems besides like, well, it's because they're not getting that 30 minutes of this or the hour of this. I think there are other problems. However, I'm not going to get into that today. Let's talk about grades, because you will see in the news a lot of people talking about like, how dare these high schools not have grades anymore? And like these tests, like they're passing these kids on to the next grade when they don't, they're not even passing. And how is this happening? And so on and so forth. So first of all, I want to talk about the inception of grades and why we even have grades in school. And really the inception of grades was to show the factories that are going to hire you, to show them whether or not you are going to be a good worker. That is what grades showed. Can you show up on time? Can you show up every day? Can you complete tasks and effectively complete those tasks? And that's really all that mattered to them. And so for grades, that was really what we were looking for in grades, was like, you got A's? Heck yeah, you're a great worker. Come on to the factories and work. So I want you to kind of think about that when you're thinking about grades. Personally, the way that we do grades, I think is kind of dumb. The grades that I had to put in for a report card for an elementary school, I had sent it to the parents because I had to, and I put in the grades because I had to. However, my teammates and I created a different report card that I think makes so much more sense. It wasn't just, oh, your child scored a 1, your child scored a 2. No, we literally broke down all of the skills in reading, writing, and math that they needed to know. Okay, so we would break it down. These are all the skills they're going to learn in reading in first grade, math, and writing. And we would give them a check on whether they were proficient or not. And we had very high standards for what we deemed as proficient. We would tell them whether or not they were proficient in these said skills. And if they were not, we would give them activities and things that they could do with their child to help them to get to proficiency in those skills. Now, those types of grades I think are super beneficial, because now you're looking at specifically what they can do instead of just like, well, A, B, C, D, E, like whatever, right? Like that doesn't really tell you anything. Like, yeah, an A says like, okay, they're obviously doing something right, but it's not a ton of information. It's not enough information for the child to even be able to get better at something. It's not good information for the parents, because if your child's getting a D, you're like, well, what can I do to help them? Like, well, they're getting a D in reading, but what does that mean, right? So I think that the way that we look at grades should definitely be examined. And then also looking at like, if a child is not proficient in said skills, like, should we just group kids based on age, or should we group them based on skills and move them on to another skill or into another class, right? As they progress along these skills. I don't know, just spitballing here, throwing out these ballpark solutions that maybe will help. I don't know. When we're looking at grades, I think it also puts a high risk on their learning. So they're not going to be willing to take a risk in their thinking, right? They're not going to come out with this ballpark solution because what if I fail the test, right? You're going to look for a system that's going to work every time, whether that be an algorithm or whatever it is. And I'm going to make sure that I do exactly as my teacher said to do it. And I'm going to get 100%. And if I don't get 100%, oh no, I'm going to be in trouble. I didn't pass my test. Like, there's so much stress that goes along with this when it shouldn't be that stressful. It should be, you know what? You didn't do well on that skill. This is what we're going to do to make it better, right? So when we're looking at the aspect of grades, I do think that the way that we are setting kids up for perfectionism is via these grades. And that is why I think that parent involvement is the key to success, is because we don't have as much support as you think at the school to help your child if they are behind, and you have all the power in the world to do little things to make sure that they do succeed. There was research done by David C. McClelland, and he was talking about grades, and he was like, okay, do grades even matter? Like, does it determine the success of the child. He said, testing for competence rather than for intelligence, how valid are these predictors? Researchers have faced great difficulty demonstrating that grades in school are related to any behavior of importance other than doing well on an aptitude test. Yet, the general public, including many psychologists and most college officials, simply have been unable to believe or accept this face. He was basically saying that grades and the study required to make grades will not predict success or failure in professions. So, like I had said, what was the point? The point was the factory worker or the factories wanted to know, are you going to be a good worker? That was really why we created grades. Now we're going to look at a quote by Albert Einstein, because I think it's a very important quote that goes along with this. Is he said, imagination is more important than knowledge. I think it's important to think like you can have an abundance of knowledge, but it's what you do with that knowledge and how you apply that knowledge that's actually the important piece, right? The action that we take within that knowledge is actually what is important. To have the ability to think, you need to be able to read, to write, to communicate effectively without judgment. Like you have to be able to kind of think out loud and discuss differing opinions and ideas with others. And maybe it's others that you don't agree with, right? We have to be able to do that to come up with new solutions that we might not have been able to come up with before. I want you to think too, sometimes our thinking may contradict or maybe it might offend. And I think it's important in our ability to understand and create new ideas is we have to maybe say some things that people may disagree with or whatever, because that is how we come up with these new solutions, is through very diverse ideas. I have seen this study go around on social media a couple of times about how school is suppressing creativity and all of this stuff. I've seen a lot of educators that get very upset with this information, and they're like, no, that is not true. Like, I make sure that my kids are in my classroom are doing things that invoke creativity. That is something that we also have to kind of take a step back. Like I said, sometimes new ideas are going to offend people, right? Because we have to let go of our own ego in order for us to think like maybe that is a possibility. Maybe that's in the realm of possibilities. So you kind of have to step back and be like, all right, is our education system set up to create a creative and thriving society? Is it there to create a mediocre society that's just there to create workers? Are we trying to create innovators? Are we trying to create thinkers? Like, you kind of have to step back and think, okay, let's think about this. I'm going to take my ego out of it and I'm going to think, is it actually benefiting our kids? Personally, as an educator, I did quit my job because I had this idea, I guess, in my head of what teaching was going to be and learning was going to be. Because let me be honest with you, when you student teach, you see the rainbows and the butterflies. You don't really see the other stuff that happens. I mean, you kind of do, but you think, that won't be like, that won't happen in my classroom. That won't, whatever. Like, it'll look different. It'll be different when I'm the teacher. And so you kind of like block that out, and then you become the teacher and you're like, oof, okay. Yep. No, that's the reality. Right. And so, I mean, I quit my job for a myriad of reasons, but one of which is that I couldn't be a part of the system anymore. It just almost felt icky to me, and all of the things I've learned about the education system and our history of it, and just thinking about the development of kids and what they need to thrive and be successful, and thinking about like, are we creating innovators and thinkers, or are we just creating workers, right? Like, what is the point of this here? And the fact that just like so many kids fall through the cracks, and there was just so many problems that I saw within the system that I just personally could not be a part of it anymore. That's also the reason that I created this business, was because I wanted to just share my experiences as well, as educate parents to know like parents are they truly are the key to success. You have so much power to ensure that your child succeeds. Encourage inductive and deductive thinking in your child outside of school, right? Even if they are in the school system. I'm not saying like, because your child's in the school system, like, oh no, everyone's going to fail. No, that's not what I'm saying. But however, I do think that it's important for us to analyze our system that's looked the same for quite some time. Parents have such a large role in the success of their child. And so that is is why I started this business, so that I could encourage you to continue to take that power into your own hands, right? I want to read this quote by Fred Landis, and he stated in mechanical engineering, "Let's improve the learning of mechanical engineering. Almost everybody is concerned with better teaching, but only a few worry about effective learning." Effective learning is really where the real magic happens, and we need to think as educators, we need to think even as parents, like, what is our role in helping our children to be good learners? And it's really thinking about taking a step back and being a guide instead of an authoritarian figure, right? Like, obviously you have to like have rules and expectations and all of that good stuff. However, in their learning, I think it's important to remember that we need to let them explore and kind of be the guide in their learning. And this kind of comes back to process over production. We need to really be excited about the process that's taking place instead of like that end goal, right? And yes, we need to have that end goal, but we need to be looking at the process and celebrating that process, because that process is going to be messy. When we're learning, it is so messy. It is not a linear thing when you're learning. You have the concept that you're trying to learn, you have failure, you have a little bit of success, you have some more failure, you have a little bit of success, you have some more failure, you have a little bit more success, and then maybe eventually you get to that piece of mastery. But it is a messy process. And so if we are more there as a guide, as a cheerleader, as a supportive person that's like there to help them get to that end goal and like celebrating the mistakes along the way, I think it's going to help to provide students with the courage to be within their inductive and deductive thinking, which is going to help to build their creativity and their imagination, to help create innovators and thinkers, because that really is an important part of our society. We have to be able to analyze things. We have to be able to criticize. We have to be able to come up with ballpark solutions that might work so that we can make sure that we're creating systems that help others. But that is just my opinion, and I'm sure that you have your own opinion as well. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Is the school system killing creativity? Is it not? If you're an educator, what do you do to help promote creativity in your classroom? And if you're a parent, what do you do at home to help promote creativity and play and imagination? I would love to hear from you. I hope that you have continued success in your learning and your child's learning. And if you have a moment, I would love for you to review this podcast. Is it helpful? Give it a follow and share an episode with someone that it might benefit.